The blizzard hit Abilene, Texas like the wrath of an angry god, and Zachary Winters knew he was a dead man if he didn't find shelter within the next hour. He had been riding back from Fort Worth when the sky opened up, dumping snow so thick he could barely see his horse's ears. January of 1885 had been brutal already, but this storm was something else entirely. His fingers were numb inside his gloves. His face felt like it had been slapped raw by 1,000 frozen hands, and his breath came out in painful gasps that crystallized in the air before him. The wind howled like a pack of wolves, and somewhere in the back of his mind, Zachary wondered if this was how he would go, frozen solid on the plains of Texas, his body not found until spring thaw. But then he saw it, a shape in the white madness, something that looked like a covered wagon tilted at an odd angle. He urged his horse forward, fighting against the wind that seemed determined to push him backward. As he got closer, he could make out more details. The wagon was definitely stuck, one wheel buried deep in a snowdrift, and there was movement inside, someone alive. Zachary dismounted, his legs nearly buckling beneath him, and stumbled toward the wagon. He pulled back the canvas flap and found himself staring at a woman, and not just any woman. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, with dark hair plastered to her face and eyes that were wide with terror. She wore a traveling dress that had probably been fine once but was now soaked through, and she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "Please," she gasped out. "Please help me. My driver, he ran off when the storm hit. He took one of the horses and left me here." Zachary didn't waste time with questions. He could see she was in the early stages of hypothermia, and if he didn't get her warm soon, she would die. He grabbed her, pulling her out of the wagon despite her weak protests, and hoisted her onto his horse. She was light, too light, and he could feel her shivering against his chest as he climbed up behind her. "My ranch is about 2 miles south," he said, his voice rough from the cold. "If we ride hard, we might make it." She didn't respond, just pressed herself against him, seeking any warmth she could find. Zachary wrapped his arms around her, holding the reins with stiff fingers, and kicked his horse into motion. The animal was reluctant, tired from fighting the storm, but it responded to his urgency. Those 2 miles felt like 20. The wind tore at them, the snow blinded them, and more than once Zachary thought they had veered off course. But his horse knew the way home better than he did, and finally, blessedly, he saw the dark shape of his ranch house emerging from the white. He half fell from his horse, pulling the woman down with him. She was barely conscious now, her lips blue, her eyes unfocused. Zachary carried her to the front door, kicked it open, and stumbled inside. The house was cold, the fire in the hearth having died down to embers, but it was shelter from the wind, and that was what mattered. He laid her on the rug in front of the fireplace and immediately set about building up the fire. His hands were clumsy, but he managed to get some kindling going, then larger pieces of wood. The flames caught and grew, casting dancing light across the room. Only then did he turn his attention back to the woman. She was still shivering, her wet clothes clinging to her. Zachary knew he needed to get her out of them, but he hesitated. It felt wrong, invasive, even though he knew it was necessary to save her life. He compromised by wrapping her in blankets first, then carefully working to remove her wet dress beneath them, trying to preserve her modesty as much as possible. She stirred slightly, making small sounds of protest, but she was too far gone to really fight him. Once he had her in dry clothes, one of his own shirts and a pair of wool socks, he wrapped her in more blankets and pulled her close to the fire. Then he set about warming himself, stripping off his own wet clothes and changing into dry ones. His fingers burned as feeling returned to them, and he gritted his teeth against the pain. For the next hour, Zachary focused on keeping them both alive. He boiled water for tea, added honey and a splash of whiskey, and managed to get some of it down the woman's throat. She coughed and sputtered but swallowed. He checked on his horse, bringing the animal into the barn and rubbing it down, making sure it had hay and water. The storm was still raging outside, the wind screaming around the corners of the house, and he knew they wouldn't be going anywhere for at least a day, maybe more. When he came back inside, the woman was awake, her eyes following him as he moved around the room. She was still wrapped in blankets, but some color had returned to her face, and she had stopped shivering quite so violently. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saved my life." Zachary poured himself some tea and sat down in the chair across from her. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, they wouldn't have. That driver, he left me to die. He didn't even look back." "He was a coward," Zachary said flatly, "but you're safe now. The storm should blow over in a day or two, and then we can figure out where you were headed." The woman's face crumpled, and to Zachary's horror, she started to cry. Not delicate tears, but great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. He sat there awkwardly, not sure what to do, until finally he moved to sit beside her and put an arm around her shoulders. "Hey now," he said. "It's all right, you're safe." "No," she sobbed. "No, it's not all right. Nothing is all right. I was supposed to be getting married. I was supposed to meet my intended husband in Abilene, and now I'm lost in a blizzard, and he probably thinks I abandoned him, and my whole life is ruined." Zachary felt something twist in his chest. Of course, she was someone's bride. A woman traveling alone in Texas in the dead of winter. What else would she be? He pulled his arm back, suddenly feeling like he had no right to comfort her. "I'm sure he'll understand once you explain what happened," he said. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "You don't understand. We've never met. It's an arranged marriage. My father set it up before he died. The man I'm supposed to marry, he paid for my travel from Missouri. He sent money for everything. And now I've lost his wagon, his supplies, everything. He'll never forgive me." Zachary stood up and moved back to his chair. "A man who can't forgive you for nearly dying in a blizzard isn't worth marrying anyway." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he felt suddenly self-conscious. He was 26 years old, weathered from years of working his ranch alone, his face unshaven and his hair too long. He probably looked like some wild mountain man to this refined woman from Missouri. "What's your name?" she asked. "Zachary Winters. This is my ranch, the Double W." "I'm Natalie Grant," she said, "and I owe you my life, Mr. Winters." "Just Zachary is fine," he said, "and you don't owe me anything. Like I said, anyone would have done the same." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Plenty of men would have left her in that wagon, not wanting to risk their own lives. And some men, bad men, would have taken advantage of her vulnerable state. He felt a surge of protectiveness toward this woman he barely knew, this Natalie Grant who had come to Texas to marry a stranger. The storm continued to rage outside, and as the evening wore on, Zachary made them a simple dinner of beans and cornbread. Natalie ate slowly, still wrapped in her blankets, sitting close to the fire. She told him more about her journey, how her father had died 6 months ago, leaving her with debts she couldn't pay. A family friend had arranged the marriage to a rancher in Abilene, a man named Harold Pemberton who needed a wife and was willing to pay off her father's debts in exchange. "I've seen his picture," Natalie said, staring into the fire. "He looks old. Not ancient, but much older than me. In his letter, he said he was 45. Zachary felt that twist in his chest again. She was maybe 23, 24 at most, and she was being sent off to marry a man old enough to be her father. It wasn't uncommon, he knew that, but it still
This
struck
story
him
was
as wrong.
posted on the channel The
You could
Rusty
always
Saddle.
say no,
Please do not
he said
repost it in
quietly.
any
She
form.
laughed, but there was no humor in it. And do what? I have no money, no family, no prospects. At least as Mr. Pemberton's wife, I'll have a roof over my head and food to eat. That's more than a lot of women can say. Zachary wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she deserved more than just survival, but he held his tongue. It wasn't his place to interfere in her life, no matter how much he might want to. That night, he gave her his bed and slept on the floor in front of the fire. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind howl and thinking about the woman sleeping in his room. He had built this ranch from nothing, working himself nearly to death for the past 5 years. He had a small herd of cattle, a sturdy house, and enough land to make a good living. But he was alone, and until today, he hadn't realized just how lonely he was. The next morning, the storm was still going strong. Zachary woke to find Natalie already up, trying to make coffee with his supplies. She was wearing his shirt still, and it hung nearly to her knees, making her look young and vulnerable. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, and in the morning light, he could see that she had freckles across her nose. "I hope you don't mind," she said when she noticed him watching her. "I thought I should make myself useful." "You're a guest," Zachary said, standing up and stretching. "You don't need to make yourself useful." "I need to do something," she said. "If I just sit here thinking about everything, I'll go mad." So they worked together, falling into an easy rhythm. She made breakfast while he went out to check on the animals, fighting through snow that was now waist-deep in places. When he came back in, stamping his feet and shaking snow from his coat, she had eggs and bacon ready, and the house smelled like coffee and warmth. They ate in companionable silence, and then Zachary taught her how to play poker with a worn deck of cards he kept in a drawer. She was terrible at it, her face giving away every good hand she got, and he found himself laughing more than he had in months. She had a quick wit and a sharp tongue, and she wasn't afraid to speak her mind, even to a man she barely knew. "You're cheating," she accused when he won the 5th hand in a row. "I'm not cheating, you're just bad at bluffing," he said, grinning. She threw a card at him and he caught it, still grinning. For a moment, their eyes met and something passed between them, something electric and dangerous. Zachary looked away first, suddenly aware of how inappropriate this all was. She was another man's intended bride, and here he was, playing cards with her in his house, enjoying her company far too much. The storm continued for 3 days. 3 days of being snowed in together, of sharing meals and stories, of learning about each other in the way that only forced proximity can create. Zachary learned that Natalie loved to read, but had had to sell most of her books to pay her father's debts. He learned that she had wanted to be a teacher, but had never had the opportunity. He learned that she was terrified of thunderstorms but loved the snow, or at least she had before this blizzard, and Natalie learned about Zachary. She learned that he had left home at 18 after his father drank himself to death, determined to make something of himself. She learned that he had worked as a ranch hand for years, saving every penny, before finally buying this land and building his ranch. She learned that he was kind and patient, that he read books on animal husbandry and crop rotation, that he dreamed of one day having a ranch that rivaled the biggest spreads in Texas. On the 3rd night, the storm finally broke. The wind died down, and the snow stopped falling. They stood on the porch together, looking out at a world transformed into white. The moon was full, casting blue light across the snow, making everything look magical and unreal. "It's beautiful," Natalie breathed. "It is," Zachary agreed, but he wasn't looking at the snow. He was looking at her, at the way the moonlight caught in her hair, at the wonder in her eyes. He knew he was in trouble. He knew he was falling for a woman he couldn't have, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. The next morning, he dug out a path to the barn and saddled his horse. "I'll take you into Abilene today," he said. "The roads should be passable now." Natalie nodded, but he saw something flicker in her eyes, something that looked like sadness or maybe regret. She had changed back into her own dress, which Zachary had hung to dry by the fire. It was wrinkled and showed signs of wear, but she looked proper again, like a lady instead of a woman wearing his oversized shirt. The ride into Abilene took several hours. The snow had drifted in places, making the going slow, and they had to stop frequently to let the horse rest. They didn't talk much, both lost in their own thoughts. Zachary kept thinking about how this would be the last time he would see her, how she would marry Harold Pemberton and become just another woman in town, someone he would maybe see at church or the general store but never really know again. As they crested the final hill before town, Natalie suddenly spoke. "Zachary, can I ask you something? Of course. If you were me, would you go through with it? The marriage, I mean." Zachary was quiet for a long moment. He knew he should say yes, should tell her to honor her commitment, but the words stuck in his throat. Finally, he said, "I think you should do whatever will make you happy. Life's too short to spend it being miserable." "But I don't know what will make me happy," she said softly. "A week ago I thought I did. I thought security and stability were all I needed. But now I don't know." They rode into Abilene just before noon. The town was busy, people digging out from the storm, horses and wagons moving through the snowy streets. Zachary headed straight for the hotel, figuring that's where Pemberton would be waiting. He was right. As soon as they dismounted, a man came rushing out of the hotel. He was tall and heavy-set, with gray hair and a florid face. His clothes were expensive, the kind of clothes a successful rancher would wear to impress a new bride. "Natalie Grant," the man said, looking her up and down with an expression that made Zachary's fists clench. "I'm Harold Pemberton. I've been waiting for you for days. Where the hell have you been?" Natalie stiffened at his tone. "I was caught in the storm, Mr. Pemberton. My driver abandoned me and I nearly froze to death. Mr. Winters here saved my life." Pemberton barely glanced at Zachary. "Well, you're here now, that's what matters, though I must say I'm disappointed. I sent a perfectly good wagon and driver for you and you've lost both. That's going to come out of your allowance." "My allowance," Natalie said, her voice cold. "Well, yes, I'll give you a small amount each month for personal items, but you'll need to manage it carefully." "I'm not made of money, you know." Zachary saw red. He stepped forward, putting himself slightly in front of Natalie. "Maybe you should be more concerned about whether your intended bride is all right rather than complaining about money." Pemberton's eyes narrowed. "And who are you to tell me how to speak to my future wife? I'm the man who saved her life while you were sitting warm and comfortable in a hotel room," Zachary shot back. "Zachary," Natalie said, putting a hand on his arm, "it's all right." But it wasn't all right, and Zachary could see in her eyes that she knew it. She looked scared and small, and he hated seeing her that way. Pemberton puffed up his chest. "Natalie, get your things. We're going to the church right now. The preacher is waiting. Right now." Natalie said, her voice shaking, "But I just arrived. I haven't even had a chance to rest or clean up." "You look fine to me," Pemberton said, "and I've waited long enough. We're getting married today." Natalie looked at Zachary, and in that moment he saw everything she was feeling. The fear, the resignation, the desperate hope that somehow this wouldn't happen. And he made a decision that he knew was crazy, knew was impulsive, knew could blow up in his face. "No," he said. Everyone turned to look at him. Pemberton's face turned even redder. "Excuse me." "I said no," Zachary repeated. "She's not marrying you today. She needs time to rest and think. She's been through hell and you're treating her like a piece of property you bought instead of a human being." "I did buy her," Pemberton snarled. "I paid
This
off her
story was
father's
posted on the
debts. She
channel The Rusty
belongs to me."
Saddle. Please do not repost
That
it
was
in
the
any
wrong
form.
thing to say. Zachary's fist connected with Pemberton's jaw before he even realized he was swinging. The older man went down hard, landing in a snowbank with a yelp of surprise. "She doesn't belong to anyone," Zachary said, his voice deadly calm. "She's a person, not property." Pemberton scrambled to his feet, snow sticking to his expensive coat. "You'll pay for this. I'll have the sheriff on you." "Go ahead," Zachary said. "Tell the sheriff I hit you for saying you bought a woman. See how sympathetic he is." Pemberton opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Natalie, who was staring at Zachary with wide eyes. "You," Pemberton said, pointing a shaking finger at her. "You're making a big mistake. You'll never find anyone else willing to take you on, not with your debts." "Maybe she doesn't need anyone to take her on," Zachary said. "Maybe she just needs someone who will treat her with respect." Pemberton made a disgusted sound and stormed back into the hotel. Zachary stood there, his heart pounding, wondering what the hell he had just done. He had just destroyed Natalie's chance at security, at stability, everything she had come here for. He turned to her, expecting to see anger or accusation, but instead she was almost smiling. "That was incredibly stupid," she said. "I know. You just made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in Abilene. I know. And you ruined my marriage before it even started." "I know," Zachary said again. Then, more quietly, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have interfered. It's your life, your choice. If you want to go after him and apologize, I'll understand." Natalie looked at the hotel, then back at Zachary. "Did you mean what you said about me not belonging to anyone? Every word?" She took a deep breath, and when she let it out, it was like watching her shed a weight she had been carrying. "Then I'm not going to apologize. I'm not going to marry a man who thinks he bought me. I'd rather starve." "You're not going to starve," Zachary said. The words came out before he could stop them, before he could think about what he was offering. "Marry me instead." Natalie's eyes went wide. "What? Marry me?" Zachary repeated, his heart hammering in his chest. "I know we've only known each other a few days, but I care about you, Natalie. I think you're smart and brave and funny, and I know I could make you happy. Or at least, I'd spend every day trying to. I have a ranch, not as big as Pemberton's, but it's mine, free and clear. I can give you a home, security, and I swear I will never treat you like property. You'd be my partner, my equal. What do you say?" Natalie stared at him, and for a long moment, Zachary thought she was going to say no. Thought she was going to tell him he was crazy, that she didn't know him well enough, that this was all too fast. But then her face softened and she smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. "You're exactly right," she said softly. "Right about what? About us, about everything." She stepped closer to him. "Yes, Zachary Winters, I'll marry you." Zachary felt like his heart might explode out of his chest. He grabbed her hands, squeezing them tight. "You mean it? You're sure?" "I'm sure," she said. "In the past 3 days I've felt more alive, more myself than I have in years. I've laughed with you, talked with you, and you've never once made me feel like I was less than you or that I owed you anything for your kindness. If that's not a foundation for a marriage, I don't know what is." Zachary pulled her into his arms, not caring that they were standing in the middle of the street, not caring who saw. She wrapped her arms around him and held on tight, and he felt like he had won the lottery. They were married that afternoon in the little church at the edge of town. The preacher was the same one who had been waiting to marry Natalie and Pemberton, and he seemed bemused by the turn of events, but willing to perform the ceremony. Zachary bought a simple gold band from the general store, and Natalie wore her traveling dress, still wrinkled from the storm. They had no guests, no family, just two witnesses pulled in from the street, but none of that mattered when the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride." Zachary did, and it felt like coming home. They spent that night in the hotel, in a room far nicer than anything Zachary usually allowed himself. He was nervous, suddenly aware that this woman was his wife, that they had made vows before God and man. But Natalie took his hand and smiled at him, and all his nervousness melted away. "I meant what I said," he told her as they lay in bed that night, her head on his chest. "You're my partner. I want your opinions on the ranch, on everything. This is your home as much as mine now." "I'm not sure I know anything about ranching," Natalie said, tracing patterns on his chest with her finger. "You'll learn, and I'll learn too. We'll figure it out together." She tilted her head up to look at him. "I never expected this. When I got on that train in Missouri, I thought my life was over in all the ways that mattered. I thought I was going to spend the rest of my days being some old man's nursemaid, living a half-life. And instead, I found you. The blizzard brought you to me," Zachary said. "Or maybe it brought me to you. Either way, I'm grateful." "The wrong bride," Natalie said with a little laugh. "The blizzard brought the wrong bride to Harold Pemberton and the right one to you." "You're exactly right," Zachary said and kissed her again. They returned to the ranch the next day, and Natalie saw it in full daylight for the first time. The house was small but sturdy, with a large front porch and windows that let in plenty of light. The barn was well built, and there were several other outbuildings in various states of repair. The land stretched out in all directions, white with snow now, but Zachary told her how it looked in summer, green and alive with possibilities. "It's perfect," Natalie said and meant it. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Natalie had never lived on a ranch before, had never done the kind of hard physical work that ranch life demanded. But she was determined to pull her weight, and Zachary was patient with her, teaching her how to milk the cow, how to collect eggs from the chickens, how to make butter and cheese. She learned to cook on the wood stove, learned to mend fences and tend to sick animals. Her hands, which had been soft and delicate, became calloused and strong, and through it all they fell deeper in love. Zachary loved the way Natalie sang while she worked, old songs from her childhood that filled the house with music. He loved the way she read to him in the evenings from the books he bought her, her voice bringing the stories to life. He loved the way she laughed, throwing her whole body into it, and the way she wasn't afraid to tell him when she thought he was being stubborn or pig-headed. Natalie loved the way Zachary woke up before dawn every morning, no matter how tired he was, to make sure the animals were cared for. She loved the way he listened to her ideas about the ranch, really listened, and implemented the ones that made sense. She loved the way he held her at night, like she was precious and necessary, and the way he looked at her sometimes, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. In March, they got their first test as a married couple. Zachary's cattle started getting sick, some kind of respiratory illness that spread through the herd. He was out day and night, trying to save as many as he could, and Natalie worked alongside him, learning to identify symptoms and administer treatments. They lost a dozen head, a significant blow to their finances, but they saved the rest, and the shared crisis brought them even closer together. "We'll make it back," Natalie said one night as they lay exhausted in bed. "We'll rebuild the herd. It'll just take time." "I hate that you have to struggle like this," Zachary said. "I wanted to give you security, and instead you're working yourself to the bone." "I'm happy," Natalie said firmly. "I'm happier than I've ever been. Yes, the work is hard, but it's our work, our ranch, our life. I wouldn't trade it for anything." In April, Pemberton tried to cause trouble. He spread rumors in town that Zachary had stolen his intended bride, that he had seduced her during the storm and convinced her to break her contract. Some people believed him, and for a while, Zachary and Natalie were given the cold shoulder by certain members of Abilene society. But the majority of people saw through Pemberton's lies.
This story was posted on
Especially
the
after
channel The
town
Rusty
doctor's
Saddle.
wife,
Please do
a
not
formidable
repost it in
woman
any
named
form.
Martha Hayes, took Natalie's side. "Any fool can see that girl loves her husband," Martha declared at the church social. "And Harold Pemberton is a miserable old skinflint who wanted a servant, not a wife. She's better off with young Winters, and that's the truth." After that, the rumors died down, and Natalie started to make friends in town. She joined the church ladies' auxiliary and started teaching Sunday school to the children. She had a gift for it, Zachary saw, a way of making learning fun and engaging. The children adored her, and she adored them right back. One Sunday in May, as they were driving home from church, Natalie turned to Zachary with a strange expression on her face. "What is it?" he asked. "I have something to tell you," she said. "I've been waiting to be sure, but I am now. Zachary, I'm going to have a baby." Zachary nearly drove the wagon off the road. He pulled on the reins, bringing the horses to a stop, and turned to her with wide eyes. "You're certain?" "Yes," she said, laughing at his expression. "I'm certain. Martha confirmed it for me. The baby should come in November, maybe early December." Zachary let out a whoop that startled the horses and pulled Natalie into his arms. "We're going to be parents. I'm going to be a father." "You're going to be a wonderful father," Natalie said, her eyes shining. "I can already see it." The months that followed were a blur of preparation. Zachary built a cradle in the barn, working late into the night to get it just right. Natalie sewed baby clothes and blankets, her hands always busy. They painted the small room off their bedroom that would serve as a nursery, choosing a soft yellow that would work for either a boy or a girl. The women from church threw Natalie a baby shower, and she came home with more gifts than they had space for, her face flushed with happiness. In November, when the first cold winds started to blow, Natalie went into labor. It was a long labor, lasting nearly 20 hours, and Zachary wore a path in the floorboards, pacing while Martha and another midwife attended to his wife. He could hear Natalie crying out, and it tore at him, made him feel helpless and useless. But finally, just after dawn, he heard a new sound, a thin wail that grew stronger. Martha opened the bedroom door with a smile on her face. "You have a son, Mr. Winters, a big, healthy boy, and your wife is doing just fine." Zachary rushed into the room. Natalie was propped up in bed, looking exhausted but radiant, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Come meet your son," she said. Zachary approached slowly, almost reverently. He looked down at the baby and felt his heart crack wide open. The boy had a thatch of dark hair and a red, scrunched-up face. As Zachary watched, he opened his eyes, revealing blue-gray irises that seemed to look right at him. "He's perfect," Zachary whispered. "What should we name him?" Natalie asked. They had discussed names for months but hadn't been able to agree on one they both loved. Now, looking at his son, Zachary knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," he said. "Thomas Grant Winters, after your father." Natalie's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Oh, Zachary, yes. That's perfect." Being parents changed everything and nothing. The work of the ranch didn't stop, but now they did it with a baby strapped to one of their backs or sleeping in a basket nearby. Thomas was a good baby, thank God, sleeping well and eating well, growing bigger and stronger every day. Zachary had never known it was possible to love someone so much, to feel such fierce protectiveness toward another human being. The winter of 1885 to 1886 was milder than the previous one, but they still had their share of storms. On those long nights when the wind howled outside, Zachary would hold Natalie close with Thomas sleeping in his cradle beside them and feel profoundly grateful. Grateful that the blizzard had brought Natalie to him. Grateful that she had said yes. Grateful for this life they were building together. In the spring, Zachary bought more cattle, rebuilding his herd. Natalie started a vegetable garden behind the house, planting seeds that Martha gave her and tending them carefully. By summer, they had fresh vegetables every day, and Natalie started canning and preserving for the winter. She also started selling her excess produce in town, bringing in a bit of extra income that they put toward improving the ranch. When Thomas was a year old, Natalie started teaching him his letters, reading to him constantly, and making games out of learning. Zachary would come in from working the fields to find his wife and son sitting on the floor, surrounded by books, both of them laughing at something. These moments were his favorite, these quiet domestic scenes that represented everything he had ever wanted, but never thought he would have. In 1887, Natalie got pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy was easier. Their daughter was born in October, a tiny little thing with Natalie's dark hair and Zachary's blue eyes. They named her Sarah, and Thomas was instantly smitten with his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. The ranch continued to grow. Zachary bought more land, expanding their grazing area. He brought on a couple of ranch hands to help with the work, young men who were respectful and hardworking. Natalie started teaching school in town 2 days a week, something she had always dreamed of doing. The children loved her, and she loved being able to use her gift for teaching while still being able to spend most of her time at home with her own children. By 1890, the Double W Ranch was one of the most successful spreads in the area. Zachary had built a reputation as a fair dealer and a skilled rancher, and Natalie was beloved in town for her kindness and her work with the children. They had 2 more children, a boy named James and another daughter named Elizabeth, and their house was always full of noise and laughter and love. One evening in the late summer of 1891, Zachary and Natalie sat on their front porch watching the sunset. Thomas, now nearly 6, was playing with Sarah and James in the yard while baby Elizabeth slept in Natalie's arms. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was warm and sweet. "You remember the night we met?" Natalie asked, her head resting on Zachary's shoulder. "Every detail," Zachary said. "I thought I was going to die in that storm, and instead I found you." "The blizzard brought the wrong bride," Natalie said, echoing the words she had said all those years ago. "And I said you were exactly right," Zachary finished. He turned to look at her, at this woman who had become the center of his world. "You're still exactly right, Natalie. Every single day." She smiled up at him. "We've built a good life, haven't we?" "The best life," Zachary agreed. "Better than anything I ever dreamed possible." Thomas came running up to the porch then, his face flushed with excitement. "Papa, can you tell us the story about how you and Mama met?" "About the big blizzard, again," Zachary said, but he was smiling. "I must have told you that story 100 times. But it's the best story," Sarah piped up, joining her brother on the porch steps. Natalie laughed. "Go ahead, tell them. I never get tired of hearing it either." So Zachary told the story again, how he had been riding home in the worst blizzard Texas had seen in decades, how he had found a wagon with a beautiful woman inside, how he had brought her home and saved her life. He told them about how she was supposed to marry another man, a mean old man who thought he had bought himself a wife, and how Zachary had punched that man in the face for disrespecting their mother. The children listened with rapt attention, even though they had heard it all before. When Zachary got to the part about asking Natalie to marry him, Thomas clapped his hands together. "And then Mama said yes," he said triumphantly. "She did," Zachary confirmed. Best decision she ever made. Second best, Natalie corrected with a smile. The best decision I ever made was not getting back on that wagon and going home to Missouri. If I had
This
given
story
up,
was
if I
posted
had
on the
turned
channel The
around,
Rusty
I
Saddle.
never would have
Please
met
do not
you.
repost it in any
The blizzard
form.
knew what it was doing, Sarah said seriously. It brought you to Papa because you were supposed to be together. Zachary met Natalie's eyes over their daughter's head. There was love there, deep and abiding, the kind of love that came from building a life together, from weathering storms both literal and figurative, from choosing each other every single day. I think you might be right, he said to Sarah. I think the blizzard knew exactly what it was doing. As the sun set and the children ran off to play again, Zachary pulled Natalie closer. The baby stirred in her arms but didn't wake. From here, they could see most of their land, the pastures where their cattle grazed, the barn that Zachary had built with his own hands, the garden that Natalie tended with such care. It was all theirs, every inch of it, built from nothing but hard work and determination and love. I love you, Zachary said, the words as natural as breathing after all these years. I love you too, Natalie replied, now and always. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing of the seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch and followed his father everywhere, learning everything he could about cattle and horses and the land. Sarah was bright and curious, always reading, always asking questions. James was the wild one, constantly getting into mischief, and Elizabeth was sweet and gentle, her father's little shadow. In 1893, the country fell into an economic depression, and times got hard. Cattle prices dropped and many ranchers went under. But Zachary and Natalie had been careful with their money, had saved for hard times, and they made it through. They had to tighten their belts, had to make do with less, but they never went hungry and they never lost the ranch. Pemberton wasn't so lucky. His ranch, which had been overextended and heavily mortgaged, was foreclosed on in 1894. Zachary heard he moved back east somewhere, a broken and bitter man. He felt no satisfaction in Pemberton's downfall, only a quiet relief that Natalie had never married him, that she had been spared that fate. By 1895, the economy started to recover, and the Double W Ranch recovered with it. Zachary and his sons, now old enough to do real work, expanded their operations again. Natalie continued teaching in town and also started a small lending library, collecting books and lending them out to families who couldn't afford to buy their own. It was her contribution to the community, her way of giving back, and it brought her great joy. In 1898, when Thomas turned 13, he asked his father if he could start working the ranch full-time instead of going to school. Zachary wanted to say yes, wanted his son by his side, but Natalie put her foot down. Education is important, she said firmly. You're going to finish school, and then if you still want to work the ranch, that's your choice. But you need to have options. Thomas grumbled but obeyed. He was a good boy, respectful of his parents, and he understood that his mother wanted what was best for him. He finished school at 16 and immediately came to work on the ranch. And Zachary had never been prouder. Sarah announced at 15 that she wanted to be a teacher like her mother. Natalie was thrilled and started training her daughter, teaching her not just the academic subjects, but also how to manage a classroom, how to reach children who struggled, how to make learning come alive. By the time Sarah was 18, she was ready to take over some of Natalie's classes, and Natalie couldn't have been more proud. James, true to form, wanted to be a cowboy. Not a rancher like his father, but a real cowboy, working different ranches, seeing the country. When he turned 18 in 1899, Zachary gave him his blessing and a good horse, and James rode out to make his own way in the world. It was hard watching him go, but Zachary understood. He had left home young too, seeking his own path. Elizabeth, their youngest, was content to stay close to home. She loved helping her mother with the teaching and the library, and she had a gift for working with the younger children. She was only 14 when the century turned, but already she was showing signs of becoming a remarkable young woman. On New Year's Eve of 1899, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the Winters family gathered on their porch to watch fireworks in the distance, set off by people in Abilene celebrating the new century. Zachary was 40 years old now, Natalie 38. Thomas was nearly 15, Sarah was 13, James was away on his adventures, and Elizabeth was 11. They had built something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. "What do you think the new century will bring?" Natalie asked, leaning against her husband. "More of the same, I hope," Zachary said. "More years with you, watching our children grow, building this ranch. That's all I need." "Always the romantic," Natalie teased, but her eyes were warm. "You made me this way," Zachary said. "Before you, I was just surviving, day to day, working myself to death for a future I couldn't really imagine. You taught me how to live, how to dream, how to love." "We taught each other," Natalie said softly. "That's what marriage is, isn't it? Teaching each other, growing together." The fireworks burst overhead, painting the sky in brilliant colors. The children cheered, and even Zachary and Natalie couldn't help but smile at the display. It was beautiful and hopeful, a celebration of all that had been and all that was yet to come. As the years of the new century unfolded, the Double W Ranch continued to thrive. Thomas took on more and more responsibility, learning not just the physical work of ranching but also the business side of things. He was smart and careful, and Zachary knew that when the time came to hand over the reins, his son would be ready. Sarah married at 21 to a young man named Daniel Cooper, a teacher who had come to Abilene from Kansas. The wedding was held at the ranch, and half the town turned out for it. Natalie cried happy tears as she watched her daughter exchange vows, remembering her own wedding day, so different but equally meaningful. James came home in 1903, having had his fill of the cowboy life. He was older now, more settled, and he was ready to help with the family ranch. Zachary welcomed him back with open arms, grateful to have both his sons working alongside him. Elizabeth, their baby, was courted by several young men, but she was in no hurry to marry. She loved her work with the children, loved helping her mother, and she was content. When she did finally marry at 23, it was to a man who respected her intelligence and her independence, a shopkeeper named Michael Thompson who thought she hung the moon. In 1905, Thomas married a sweet girl named Anna, and by 1906, Zachary and Natalie were grandparents. Holding his grandson for the first time, a boy named Zachary Thomas Winters, Zachary felt the circle of his life completing. He had built something that would last, a legacy that would continue through his children and their children. Natalie still taught occasionally, though she had handed over most of her classes to Sarah. She spent her time now with her grandchildren, reading to them and teaching them their letters, just as she had done with her own children. Her hair was starting to go gray, and there were lines around her eyes, but to Zachary, she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. One evening in the summer of 1908, they sat on their porch as they had done 1,000 times before. They were alone, the children grown and in their own homes now, and the house behind them was quiet. Zachary reached over and took Natalie's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. 23 years, he said. 23 years since that blizzard. The best 23 years of my life, Natalie said. Every single day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days, Zachary asked. Especially the hard days, Natalie said. Because we faced them together. Because we never gave up on each other. That's what love is, isn't it? Not the easy moments, but the hard ones when you choose to stay, when you choose to fight for what you have. Zachary thought about all the challenges they had faced over the years. The cattle disease, the economic depression, the droughts and the floods, the times when money was tight and the future uncertain. But they had faced all of it together, and it had made them stronger. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every single moment, every single struggle if it meant ending up here with you." "So would I," Natalie said. She squeezed his hand. "The blizzard brought me to you, Zachary, but love made me stay. Love built all of this, our family, our home, our life, and I wouldn't change a thing."
This story was
They
posted on the
sat
channel
together
The
as the
Rusty
sun
Saddle.
set,
Please do not
painting the
repost it
Texas
in any
sky in
form.
shades of gold and crimson. The land stretched out before them, their land, the Double W Ranch that they had built from nothing. In the distance, they could see cattle grazing, could see the barn and the outbuildings, could see the vegetable garden that still flourished after all these years. This was their legacy, their life's work. Not just the physical ranch, but the family they had created, the love they had built, the example they had set. Their children were good people, hardworking and honest and kind, and they were raising their own children with the same values. The winter's name meant something in Abilene now, meant integrity and community and perseverance. And it had all started with a blizzard, with Zachary riding through a storm and finding a woman in a wagon, with a split-second decision to help a stranger, with Natalie choosing to take a chance on a man she barely knew. "Wrong bride," Zachary said softly, echoing the words Natalie had spoken so many years ago. "Exactly right," Natalie replied, and they both smiled, remembering. In 1910, Zachary officially retired, handing over full control of the ranch to Thomas and James. He was 51 years old and felt every one of those years in his bones, but he was satisfied. He had done what he set out to do. He had built something lasting, had created a life worth living, had loved and been loved in return. He and Natalie spent their days now in a slower rhythm, helping with the grandchildren when needed, tending Natalie's garden, reading together in the evenings. They took walks around the ranch, hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. These were their golden years, the reward for all the hard work and sacrifice that had come before. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1910, their children threw them a party. The whole town turned out, and the ranch was filled with people, all there to celebrate Zachary and Natalie, to honor the love story that had become legend in Abilene. People still talked about how Zachary had punched Harold Pemberton, how he had proposed to Natalie right there in the street, how she had said yes without hesitation. Martha Hayes, now well into her 70s but still sharp as a tack, gave a toast. "I've known a lot of couples in my time," she said, raising her glass. "But I've never seen two people more perfectly suited for each other than Zachary and Natalie Winters. They've faced every challenge together, built an empire together, raised fine children together. They're an example to us all of what marriage should be." "To Zachary and Natalie, to Zachary and Natalie," the crowd echoed. Zachary looked at his wife, saw the tears in her eyes, and pulled her close. "I love you," he whispered in her ear. "Today and always." "Today and always," she whispered back. They danced that night, Zachary and Natalie, moving slowly to music played by a local band. They weren't the young people they had once been, didn't have the energy they used to have, but it didn't matter. What mattered was being in each other's arms, celebrating all they had built together, looking forward to whatever time they had left. As the party wound down and the guests began to leave, their children and grandchildren gathered around them. Thomas and Anna with their 3 children, Sarah and Daniel with their 2, James and his wife Margaret with their newborn son, Elizabeth and Michael with their daughter. This was their family, their legacy, and Zachary felt a profound sense of peace looking at them all. "We're so proud of all of you," Natalie said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've all become such good people and you're raising good children. That's all we ever wanted." "We learned from the best," Thomas said, and his siblings nodded in agreement. Later that night, as Zachary and Natalie lay in bed, exhausted but happy, they talked about the party, about all the people who had come to celebrate with them. "I never imagined this," Natalie said. "When I was on that train from Missouri, scared and alone, heading toward a marriage I dreaded, I never imagined I could be this happy, that I could have all of this. The blizzard changed both our lives," Zachary said. "If it hadn't hit when it did, if I hadn't found you, I don't know what would have happened. I probably would have kept working myself to death, alone and lonely, never knowing what I was missing. But we did find each other," Natalie said. "Against all odds, in the middle of one of the worst storms Texas had ever seen, we found each other. That has to mean something." "It means we were meant to be," Zachary said. "I truly believe that. You were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours, and everything that happened, every twist and turn, led us to that moment." They fell asleep holding each other, as they had every night for 25 years, and would continue to do every night for many years to come. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. They became great-grandparents in 1915, when Thomas's oldest daughter had a baby. The cycle of life continued, generations building on what had come before, and Zachary and Natalie watched it all with grateful hearts. In 1920, at the age of 61 and 59 respectively, they were still in good health and still deeply in love. The ranch was more successful than ever under Thomas and James's management, and their other children were thriving in their own pursuits. Sarah had become a principal at the Abilene School. Elizabeth ran the library that Natalie had started all those years ago, and their grandchildren were growing up strong and healthy. One evening in late January of 1920, 35 years after that fateful blizzard, another storm hit Abilene. It wasn't as bad as the one in 1885, but it was still significant, dumping several inches of snow and bringing howling winds. Zachary and Natalie stood on their porch, bundled up in coats and scarves, watching the snow fall. "Remember," Zachary said. "How could I forget?" Natalie replied. "The blizzard that changed everything. The blizzard that brought you to me," Zachary said. "The best thing that ever happened to me." Natalie turned to him, and even with the lines on her face and the gray in her hair, he could still see the young woman he had saved from that wagon, the woman who had looked at him with such trust and hope. And he knew she saw the same thing when she looked at him, not the old man he had become, but the young cowboy who had risked his life to save her, who had stood up to Harold Pemberton, who had offered her his name and his heart without reservation. "You're exactly right," she said. The words they had said to each other so many times over the years, the words that had become their private mantra. "Always and forever," Zachary replied, and kissed her as the snow swirled around them. They stood there together, two people who had built a life from nothing, who had faced every challenge hand in hand, who had loved each other through the good times and the bad. The blizzard had brought them together, but love had kept them that way. Love and commitment, and the determination to honor the vows they had made that day in the little church in Abilene. As they finally went inside, out of the cold and into the warmth of the home they had made together, Zachary looked around at the life they had created. The walls were covered with photographs of their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The shelves were filled with books that Natalie had collected over the years. The furniture was worn but comfortable, every piece holding memories. This was what they had built. Not just a house or a ranch, but a home. A place filled with love and laughter, with family and friends, with memories both sweet and bittersweet. It was more than Zachary had ever dreamed possible when he
This
was a
story
young
was
man
posted on
working
the
other
channel The
people's
Rusty
ranches,
Saddle. Please do
saving
not
every
repost
penny.
it in any form.
It was more than Natalie had ever imagined when she was a frightened young woman on a train, heading toward an uncertain future. They had found each other in the middle of a blizzard, two lost souls brought together by fate or chance or divine intervention, whatever you wanted to call it. And they had chosen each other, not just that first day, but every day since. They had chosen to love each other, to support each other, to build a life together. And that, in the end, was what made their story not just a romance, but a legacy. They had shown their children and grandchildren what real love looked like, what commitment meant, what it took to build something lasting. They had proven that love wasn't just a feeling, but a choice, an action, a daily decision to put someone else first, to work together toward common goals, to never give up on each other. As they settled into bed that night, the wind still howling outside, Zachary pulled Natalie close. She fit against him perfectly, just as she always had, and he breathed in the familiar scent of her, lavender and home. "I love you," he said, the words as important now as they had been 35 years ago. "I love you too," Natalie replied. "Now and always until the end of time." And as they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, the blizzard raged outside. But inside, they were warm and safe, surrounded by everything they had built together, every dream they had made real, every promise they had kept. The wrong bride had come to the wrong door that day in 1885. But Zachary Winters had looked at her and known, somehow known, that she was exactly right. And he had spent every day since then proving it, to her and to himself, building a life and a love that would last long after they were gone. They lived many more years after that, growing old together, watching their family expand and flourish. They died within months of each other in 1932, Zachary at 73 and Natalie at 71, surrounded by the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who loved them. And when they laid them to rest in the Abilene Cemetery, side by side under a simple headstone that read "Together Forever," everyone agreed that the world had lost a remarkable couple, but their story lived on, passed down through the generations. The story of how a blizzard had brought the wrong bride to the wrong place, and how a cowboy had looked at her and said, "You're exactly right." The story of how they had built a ranch and a family and a life together, facing every challenge with courage and grace. The story of true love, the kind that lasted not just a lifetime but for all time. The Double W Ranch still stands today, passed down through the Winters family, a testament to what Zachary and Natalie built. And on cold January nights, when the wind howls and the snow falls, people in Abilene still tell their story, reminding each other that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that sometimes the wrong turn leads to the right destination, and that when you find someone who is exactly right, you should never let them go.